Okay, it is time to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for watching. For those of you who do not know who I am, my name is Niko. I am the host of the political radio show Mikasa Sukasa. And today I'm going to try to give some scope to the discussion of the Affordable Health Care Act, what transitioning out of it could mean, what Trump Care is as far as what we know so far, and why it's, in my opinion, a necessity for us to transition into single payer. So many of you, like myself, I'm sure, have been floating around the internet having conversations with different friends and family and are probably confused because some people say the Affordable Health Care Act works. Some people say it's an utter failure. You probably fall into either one of those categories. You've heard things like, oh, I pay $12 a month for my health care coverage and I'm fully covered with zero co-pays and only a $200 deductible. There are other horror stories, like a couple that I know paying $2,400 a month with a $7,500 deductible apiece. So they essentially don't actually ever use their health care coverage. And now you may be thinking that these people are perhaps liars. That is not the case. The truth of the matter is, actually, depending on whether you live in a blue state, mostly, there's a couple of variances. Texas has finally caught up to the bandwagon. They actually do pretty good subsidies. But depending on whether you live in a blue state or a red state is actually a pretty good indicator of whether or not the Affordable Care Act is working. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, blue states, as you all probably know if you live in California, New York, Washington, even North Carolina to a degree, some parts are even Florida, states that are blue or economically stable or successful even, they tend to have pretty much the desired results for the most part for the Affordable Care Act as far as price is concerned. And the reason that is because all of those states have something in common. They actually expanded Medicaid so that the Affordable Care Act could offer the subsidies necessary to ensure that medical insurance premiums are to remain low for those who need them. Now that's the issue with the people who can't afford medical insurance. Now, there's the other side of that fence. Why does it seem like, because I know many of you have probably dealt with this, why does it seem like those who are healthy, those who don't use their medical insurance often, those who don't really take that many prescriptions, things like that, why does it seem like you all are paying more? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is because you all are indeed paying more. That is a fact. You are in what's called, unless you are getting this through your business or your job, which is a whole different animal I don't want to tackle today. But if you're getting this through an individual plan, it is highly likely that you are paying more because you don't use your plans that much. They know you're not going to be going to the hospital that often, and they have to charge somebody for these super expensive medical bills that cancer patients, hepatitis patients, just anybody with a long-term or chronic illness who has to get treatments once a week or twice a week or 3 times a month. Somebody has to pay for it. And if those who have chronic illnesses can't get jobs and are permanently disabled until otherwise cured, can't pay for it, who's going to pay for it? You were right. It will be you, the healthy person. So essentially in our system, Obamacare penalizes people who are healthy. Another problem with Obamacare is the fact that if you were on Obamacare, because you are a part of what is called an HMO, which is a health maintenance organization, versus a PPO, which is a preferred provider network organization, you are stuck with your primary care provider, with your specialist, and with your hospital designated for emergency purposes. What does that mean? I don't know if any of my supporters or any of the people on this video have ever gotten sick or had an emergency outside of the state that they reside in, that they got their Obamacare under. If you have, then you would know that you are absolutely not covered out of the state. You will be lucky to be covered down the street from your house if it is not in the network that Obamacare designated for you. And that is a huge flaw, one of the nuanced flaws that a lot of people don't talk about because they really don't occur that often, because oftentimes people don't get in emergencies when they're on vacation. But trust me, it happens more often than you think. Now, let's also talk about the fact that if you are not in college and you are not 26 and you live in a single parent household, how are you going to get insured? Because if your mom or your father has insurance through their job and they can't get another insurance company, they can't get on another insurance company while they're insured through their employer, how exactly is that child supposed to be insured if they're not in school and if they're not employed? Now, if they are in school, they can get insurance through their school. But if they're not at school and you have a single mother or a single father, you're what we call SOL, ladies and gentlemen, because you are in that weird gap years where you can't get insurance through Obamacare by yourself, specifically because of your age. And for your parents, they're kind of, they would have to drop their job insurance, which is probably better than getting Obamacare by itself. And of course, at that point, all of their premiums will go up. So, and some employers don't even allow for you to drop their health insurance. So there's that also. There's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of nuanced flaws to Obamacare ACA that a lot of these articles do not discuss. Now, some of these articles don't discuss them because they simply don't know that these flaws exist, because these are nuanced flaws that you really have to be in the industry to be aware of. And as I am in the industry, I hear about these things and I see these flaws daily. I mean, the fact that you have to have what is called comprehensive coverage under Obamacare in order to not be penalized by the tax penalty at the end of the year is absolutely ridiculous and economically unsustainable. In fact, I'm almost 100% positive that when the insurance companies decided to write this legislation, they were expecting at some point that someone would read it and figure this out and correct or account for that. But the truth of the matter is, if some people have this that have high deductibles, high premiums, but they would either, one, just rather not pay it because, well, if you're only paying $650 an adult versus paying for a penalty versus paying $12,000 a year for your health care premium, and if I have a $7,500 deductible on my medical expenses and then a $500 deductible on my prescriptions, exactly why would I just not take the penalty? I think that's exactly what I would do in that scenario. And that is why you have the issue that you're hearing about now, which is the fact that medical insurance companies are actually deciding to leave states because they're not making any money. And this is a fact. And because of that decrease in competition, if you're in a situation like Utah where they barely have anybody that can insure them, the prices are going to go up. And that's just a fact. That's just capitalism and that's market economy. So overall, I would label the Affordable Care Act an absolute unequivocal failure. Yes, the people who need to be insured as far as health is concerned are being insured. But what they're essentially initializing is this attack on the middle class. It's an attack on the impoverished in areas that aren't in blue states. So people think that, like, oh, because you hear about subsidies in California with someone with low income, or New York or Florida or areas like that are blue and economically stable, that people are benefiting from this across the country, and that is not at all the case. Like I said, in places like Arizona, I know people who have quit their jobs because they made too much money. So if you're in a city like, for example, Denver, Colorado, I talked to a gentleman who was making $150,000 a year. His property taxes were crazy, as you probably know if any of you live in Denver, Colorado. On top of that, because he was single, he actually had a much higher premium than almost anybody else in the state. Being single, middle-aged, and upper middle class is the worst thing you can be in Obamacare. You will literally lose the majority of the income that you would need to sustain yourself if you were upper middle class prior to Obamacare kicking in. So he was getting he would say he was after his property taxes, that would be cost him about $15,000. Then after Obamacare, he was paying $1,200 a month, and that's not including his deductible. So with that scenario, he actually couldn't afford to even use his health care insurance. So as you can see, Obamacare is not as it's not as black and white as they try to pretend it is, and that's just a fact. The truth of the matter is, a lot of Democrats have just become so emotionally invested in Obama's legacy that they're not looking at this from a rational perspective, and they're not listening to the stories of those who haven't seen success from Obamacare. In fact, they've seen the total and complete opposite. Now, that is not to say that the Republicans have offered a viable choice, but if we're looking from a strictly economic perspective, the Republicans' choice actually, for the most part, is better from an economic perspective. However, until they deal with the pre-existing condition clause, that is going to continue to be a problem, the same problem that we had before Obamacare, which is that those who absolutely need it, it is going to be a life and death situation, may be denied coverage because of it. However, if people find that medical insurance is much more affordable under this new piece of legislation, there is a good chance that they may be able to start admitting in patients with pre-existing conditions. And now, of course, that's something that has to be done they need to make this a law, and they need to address this in the bill. But why I'm saying that's more viable is because right now, as the system is set up, the healthy people are actually paying to take care of those who are sick, but not actually receiving those benefits in return when they actually need them. What would happen in this new piece of legislation is that because healthcare plans will become more accessible as competition is able to increase, and you don't have government mandates on price setting and comprehensiveness as far as how much you're covered. You would start seeing lower prices, more competition, and ultimately more people benefiting from it and being covered. Now here's where it gets dicey. Now, there have been plenty of Democrats bragging or boasting, or whatever you want to call it, saying that the Obamacare mandate for minimum coverage is absolutely necessary. That is a lie. That's wrong. It shouldn't. The Obamacare mandate for comprehensive coverage is exactly why you all are paying so much money. It's not necessary for example, myself, I'm young, I'm in shape. If I was living with my mother and my brother, or if I was living with my wife and my child who drove, or if I had close friends around me, in an emergency situation, does it actually make sense for me to have ambulatory coverage and make it mandatory that I pay for that, knowing how much it's going to cost me, especially if I never use it, right? Does it make sense for me to have required pregnancy? Because that's the rule under Obamacare. I'm not joking. You have to have pregnancy coverage and drug treatment coverage if I've never touched a drug a day in my life. If I've never, if I obviously have no intention on being pregnant. So under the new plan, and under any plan that would make sense, you would essentially want to be able to pick and choose what coverage you need to keep your premiums down. I think that makes perfect sense. So that is some of the success. Like, the success of Obamacare is that in states where they choose to expand Medicare or Medicaid, it's working. In places where they are now, Justin says I am out of my element on this topic. He would be totally false. I work in the medical insurance industry. I know exactly what I'm talking about. Like I said, if you understand the dichotomy of partisan politics and understand that there were some Republicans who were wanting to see Obamacare fail no matter what because it had Obama's name on it, it's not far-fetched at all to understand that they would rather see their people suffer than see Obamacare succeed. And that's just a fact of life, because some of these Republicans, the establishment Republicans, are simply evil. But in states where they wanted to see Obama successful and the Obamacare successful because they signed off on it, of course they're going to be more likely to expand it so that it expand Medicaid so that it works correctly. It's not really hard at all to understand this. But what is difficult for me to understand is why people can't just understand why we can't have single payer. I don't understand why we can't have single payer. This isn't something that's like crazy to contemplate, because almost anyone who's worked in the insurance industry long enough understands why it's absolutely necessary to have single payer. It's feasible. We've seen economies with less use it, and it works successfully. For those of you who are saying we have a shortage in doctors, well, you wouldn't have a shortage in doctors if you take some of these subsidies that you're offering for patients and offer them for people to get degrees. We could offer streamlined visa access for those who come to the United States, get their PhD, not their PhD, but get their MD in whatever specialization they choose, and then practice in the States. We can also give subsidies and tax breaks for those who wish to start their own practices. These are extremely feasible ideas to ensure that single payer is successful. It's not hard. Anybody who's telling you it's hard is simply lying, or they don't understand how the industry works. They don't understand how single payer works in other countries. And for those who think that the first line you're going to be hit with is the classic, well, what about the long wait times? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure if you've ever had to get surgery in the United States, but the wait times aren't that much shorter, and the pockets afterwards hurt a lot worse, I promise you. But we have, as the United States, the means to do much more and expand single payer in such a way that has been unprecedented amongst any single payer system in the world. This is a verifiable fact. But we need to convert to single payer, and it needs to be done now, because right now, under the current Affordable Care Act, millions of middle class suffer, and we are seeing people do total drops from middle class to lower middle class to becoming impoverished just to ensure that their family has medical care. On the other side of that fence, you have people who absolutely need medical care who are going to be hurt if Trump care passes. This is a lose-lose situation, is essentially what I'm getting at. There is no success. There is no, well, we saved a couple at the expense of millions. Well, we saved these millions at the expense of these other millions. At the end of the day, single payer is the only feasible answer. And that's just a fact. And until we have that conversation, these debates are on Obamacare, on Trump care, and all that, it's almost meaningless, because people are going to lose. They're going to lose, and I don't know how we recover from millions being dropped all at once. I mean, even now, people are dropped regularly. For those of you who don't know, say if you're on Medicaid via Obamacare, which happens a lot. If you're dropped from your Medicaid coverage, guess what? You can't get back in. If you're dropped from your Obamacare coverage, you cannot get back in until the open enrollment period. So what if you enroll in November and you're dropped in December or January because of a computing error, which happens quite often once again? So what happens next? That means you go uninsured for the next year unless you decide to go through private insurance. And depending on what you need, that could be very expensive. So I suggest doing your own research, but correct people. Stop letting people talk in these generalities. It's working for my friend, because that's usually the arguments you hear when you're talking about Affordable Health Care Act, right? On your Facebook status or with your friends and family. It's working for my family. It's working for my friend in this state. It's working for this city. Because it is working for specific people in very specific scenarios. But it is not working for everyone. It is not working for a majority of the people. In fact, I think more people are uninsured now. When Obamacare first started, it was like, I want to say 13 or 14 million people uninsured, and now I think it's actually going to increase. It has increased like exponentially since, because people simply can't afford the premiums. They would just rather pay the tax penalty. So with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. I urge you all to share this video. Please contribute to our One Follow $1 campaign, where we show the mainstream media that we don't need them anymore, and that if they won't cover the truth, then we will support those who will. You can go to my Patreon. Actually, I'll post a link below in the comment section, and you can also go to it at the top of my Facebook page at www.patreon.com/mikasa. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope this is very informative. If you have any articles, I would suggest posting the link in the comment section below, and we can have some hopefully meaningful dialogue about this. And I would love to be able to answer any questions you all may have for me. Always remember, find your balance. Peace.